What do you see when you talk to leaders in terms of, how are the Gen Zs, the Gen Ys leading the Gen Zs, and what have you been seeing that's been working, and perhaps what could they be doing better?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. So like you, I'm also observing that most people who are seeking kind of executive development are of course Gen Y and Gen X, right? Because that's the managerial class in our
Yeah.
organizations, right? There are a few with every baby boomer that retires, a Gen Y or a Gen Z enters the workforce, right? So it's certainly the vast majority now when we talk about the workforce are Gen Y and Gen X, and Gen Z is obviously the very low minority, but now they're going to be flooding the workforce. Um, the the view about like leaving organizations, lack of loyalty is probably something that supersedes any one generation, and you pointed that out, right? Our Gen Y and Gen Z seem to have this in common, that they kind of leave organizations with frightening rapidity. And I think some of that has to do with the ubiquity of technology and being digital natives, right? Both generations have that in common. So if you go back to what I said before, that a generation is defined by the context in which they were raised, since they're both digital natives, then those paradigms still apply. And that paradigm is that it's very easy to find new jobs and to be approached by new employers. Like when I was entering the workforce in my 20s, if I wanted to apply for a job, I had to open a newspaper. I had to scroll through, right? I had to circle, and then I had to send a letter, and then I had to, with my CV and my then I had to wait several weeks, and then I might or might not hear back. It was a long, drawn out process and required me to be incredibly proactive. I had to I had to make a decision. I am going to look for and apply for a job. And it took forever, right? And then maybe I got an interview. So then I'd have to arrange a time. And it would probably be weeks after that, right? That you'd find a time when I could go. Now, Gen Ys, Gen Z, all of us now, of course, with technology, companies through LinkedIn are approaching us all the time. Are you available? Are you interested? Or headhunters as well, right? Are using different social media to identify top talent. And if the company really wants us, then the time to the interview could be a matter of hours or days because of Zoom and other platforms like that. So everything's compressed. It's really easy to change jobs. And that alone, I think, is hugely accountable for why we see people changing. It's just easier to do so, which is slightly different perspective from, well, you don't care about your employer. But I think there's some of that too. So sometimes when companies and particularly HR directors ask me to speak to them at conferences and whatnot, and they say, "Could you talk about, this lack of, corporate loyalty among the youngest generations?" I generally have to start those conversations with a slightly contrarian perspective, and that is, you have to look in the mirror if you're wondering
Mm.
why your employees are leaving, because they're rejecting something that you're offering or not offering, right? You can't just say it's all them. It's a relationship between employer and employee. So what are you doing that is making employment with your company less attractive? And you can easily see some of that. So Gen Ys really had it tough because they entered the workforce probably in the Great Recession in many cases, right? 2007 to 9, where they saw, people joining a company and then losing their job immediately, or they'd see their older siblings or their parents losing their jobs or losing their pension plans. And what does that teach them? You can't rely on an employer. You got to look out for number one, is the harsh lesson, right? And then just as things started settling down, boom, COVID, right? And they again were either lost their jobs or they were furloughed, and just as they were supposed to be kind of just entering like management, right? But now companies are going, oh no, that's okay. Our current managers will take it from here. We don't need as many people on deck because of COVID or whatnot. And of course, that depends on the industry, but nevertheless. So, Gen Y have been taught by their employers that they can't be loyal to those employers. So employers have got to look, as I said, have got to look in the mirror there. Um, and Gen Z, of course, now entering the workforce, are in a period of incredible turbulence, inflation, cost of living, and so there again, they might just be pursuing, well, where am I going to get the highest development or the highest salary, just in order to keep my head above water. Gen Ys are often looking for development or flexibility. I think Gen Z are probably looking more for that security because things are so
Mm.
tough right now, which is again more like Gen X in terms of what they're looking for in a job. But this idea too of quick development, I think Gen Y and Gen Z have that in common. Development used to almost be a reward for tenure. You know,
Mm.
once you've worked for the company for 10 years, then you get to do this, like development opportunity. You get to go on this course or whatever that is. Well, as you said, that just doesn't work anymore. Individuals, they want development all the time, every day, something. But that is possible. So going to your question about how Gen Y can better manage Gen Z is you have to be explicit about the development you're giving your people. The good news is that a lot of that development is stuff that's they're doing on the job anyway, but we don't call it development. So if you're giving your Gen Z employee like a new project, don't just say I'm giving you this project or I'm giving you this project because it's the next project up on deck and you're available. But this project involves working with this client in this industry or in this dysfunction, and you'll be able to work with these senior colleagues. So these are all development opportunities for you, and that's why I'm giving you this project. Now you may have given them that project anyway, but if you can help people create links between their what they do every day and how you're developing them as professionals, um, it's a very small amount of thoughtfulness and effort that can make an overweighted difference. That's one technique. I have lots of other suggestions for how to
Sure.
better manage Gen Z, but I think that's one area to deal with this kind of perception of a development gap.
Right. No, absolutely. And yes, interesting you mentioned that, Adam. I was watching on a show just last night where they mentioned about this very specific thing about how the Gen Zs are extremely worried about their retirement and
Yeah.
considering all that's happening around them with the cost of living. And it's just not in the US, I mean, it's everywhere. And the fact that their retirement age is now kind of moving up in many ways, and they're not staying and working longer, right? So what do they do? So the message was, of course, like, start showing interest in money early in your life and be a good planner, listen to your parents, and so on.